Hello and welcome back. So in the game at the moment we do have missions of several tiers which are separated by several types ranging from combat, mining, industry and other missions, and all of these missions are also separated by rarity, which means some missions are going to be rarer than others, and these rare missions do pay really good. And of course the rare missions are going to be a lot more difficult than the ordinary ones. Now I'll be showing you how these rare missions work and how they look, and of course I'll be trying to give you some tips at how to complete those missions. Now first thing, those missions are different from the normal ones because you're going to be fighting a lot of these normal enemies, and of course you're going to be encountering elite ships in these missions, in some cases up to 3 or 4 of these elite ships. And keep in mind, those elite ships are very dangerous, and if it is a elite cruiser or a elite battle cruiser, then things might go wrong for the vast majority of ships in the game. And I'll be giving you an example. As you can see here, my stabber is taking quite some damage, and I am already thinking at warping out. And this isn't even in the wave where the faction ships will jump in. So you are definitely going to need a very tanky ship or a ship that has a very long range. Now at the start you did see one such ship that I am preparing for these missions, so you can stay tuned for the Caracal Navy, which is going to be in one of the next upcoming videos. And that ship is truly a monster in terms of range, and that ship is doing these missions very effectively. Now in these missions, in the more rare missions, you are going to be very careful around which target you choose, since the elite ships that you can fight and that you will fight in these missions are going to carry webiffers and disruptors. And besides that, they are also going to do a lot more damage than these normal rats. And especially the cruisers and battle cruisers, they have the most powerful weaponry, and they should be your primary target if possible. And of course I do separate my targets by range mostly, and by threat according to my ship. Now my ship, this stabber, does have decent resistances against missiles, and it does offer very good resistances against all the damage types. But this ship is a tier 5 ship, and my modules are still mostly tier 5, even my rigs are still mostly tier 1 or tier 2. And in that case I would be better off at having a ranged build, since if I do have the range between my ship and these rats, then they aren't going to be able to hit my ship, and if that's the case, then I am safe from taking damage. Since I do want to show you a couple examples of what can happen if you make a couple mistakes, then I did decide to go with a short range build, and just to show you the sheer brute firepower of all of these rats. Now if I did have my Caracal Navy, this would have been very easy, as you will see in the next video, since that ship is still not quite ready for the storyline missions, but it will be very soon, and I'll be flying that ship, and you will see the difference between a classic ship and a navy ship, which is very noticeable if I were to be honest. Now I did manage to clear this mission with the stabber. Of course I did have couple warp outs and couple warp ins, and you will face at least 3 waves in these missions, 3 waves of the rats, and the third and second wave can be the most dangerous ones, because if your ship is already very damaged in the first wave, then you should warp out at on time in order to repair your ship or to restore your capacitor, or in the future to reload the weapons, since you don't want to be caught by the second or third wave unprepared, especially if the second wave comes with a elite ship. Now the elite frigates aren't much of a problem, since they are only fast and they can web you and only disrupt your warp. But the cruisers, they can be a big problem, since besides having the same thing as the frigates, they also come with very powerful weaponry, and you don't want to be caught by surprise by those ships, since getting caught by these is not a good idea, especially if your ship is already damaged and if you were preparing to warp out. So aligning before you kill the last ship is definitely a good idea if you plan on warping out to repair or replenish your ammunition or to recover the capacitor. And I think this will be the second wave. Yeah, this is the second wave that I am clearing here. And I have to admit, I did not expect these ships to hit this hard, since I do have very good resistances against all damage types, but they still do a lot of damage to this stabber. And if I were to have a long distance build, I would have been safe from their weapons. Now here I did warp out and I did warp in for the third wave at 100 kilometers, so that I can separate the elite frigate from the main group of enemies. Since if that frigate were to catch me while I was in the middle of all of these ships over there, then I would be pretty much toasted, because these ships do have firepower that can overpower my shield boost and they can overpower my resistances. So in this case, the safest thing to do is warp at 100 and then wait for the elite ship to approach you. And then when the elite ship is already away from the main group of enemies, then you focus on the elite ship and then you make it a 1 versus 1, since in this case it is the best thing to do and it is also the safest thing to do, since I can destroy that ship without much of a problem one-on-one, and I don't have to worry about being webbed or scrambled, since I am far away from the main group of enemies, and the main group of enemies is slow, so they can't catch me even if they try. And this is how I did clear the third wave, or should I say this is how I started to clear the third wave, and this is where the long range ships are going to do a very good job, since if I were to have a long range build, a long range fit for this ship, then this frigate would already be destroyed by the time it reached me. But since I do have autocannons on this stabber, I do have to fight the ship up close, and I am doing a good job at taking the frigate out. Now in this case it is good to have Webifers, because those ships are very fast and that frigate is actually a little bit faster than my stabber, which is okay. If I had a Webifer, then I would have reached that frigate already. So if you plan to do, and if you plan to use the same tactic as I used right now here, then make sure to pack 1 or 2 Webifers to web these frigates if you plan to separate them from the main group of enemies, like I did here, since they can be fast and they need to be, those frigates need to be destroyed very quickly. Okay, well, since that frigate is destroyed, now I can slowly start to approach the main group of enemies, but first let me check out to see what's in that elite rack. Now you want to pay attention to these racks, since they can carry very valuable items and faction items, which you can use or sell. And it did give me a faction Webifer, which can be sold for a quite decent price. So make sure to loot these wrecks and don't let those wrecks in space. And of course, this is why I like to do these missions solo, because there is no teammate who can take the wrecks and you can have all the loot for yourself. Now I did engage these targets the same way that I did engage in the first wave. I know it is risky, but I do think that I can manage. And here is where I got the idea to separate the other ships by range and to take them out all one by one, which is the same tactic that I used with the elite frigate, but this time around I am using the same tactic with the normal ships, and this also works if your ship can't take a lot of damage. And this tactic also works very nice, and it works very good. And in this case you need to make sure to keep the other ships at a distance so that you can focus on one ship, and after you destroy the target then you can focus on the other ship, and in that way you can destroy all of the enemy ships in the mission, which is a interesting way of doing these missions, and it is a alternative way for the close range fitted ships if they can't take a lot of damage, which usually works, since if you warp at 100 kilometers, then the slowest enemy ship will be the furthest away from you, while the ones that are faster are going to be approaching you quicker. And if you wait long enough, then those ships will have a decent distance between each other, and then you can slowly pick them off one by one, and you can avoid all incoming damage in this scenario, and of course using this tactic. Now this also requires some practice, since in some cases you will have several ships that are around the same speed and they're going to be at around the same distance, and in that case it will be a 2 versus 1. But if you approach one of them at a certain distance, and that distance also depends on the targets, and of course if you approach them from a different angle, then you can also separate those ships that are around the same speed, and that also works very well, since I did already try that and I actively use that from time to time. Now when I jump in my Caracal Navy, it will be a lot different, since that ship does have around 50 to 60, I think it's even 70 kilometer range, and it does have a very interesting rate of fire, which you will see when I play that ship. And for now, the Stabber is also doing a very good job at these missions. Now be careful here, since I'll be sharing some of my experiences with some of these ships. If you encounter a elite battlecruiser in these Caldari missions, you should immediately prepare to warp out, because these battlecruisers can do over 500 damage per missile salvo, and they shoot very fast. So if you encounter these, make sure to have at least a very tanky ship with at least 80 plus resistances on all damage types, or you need to have at least 60 or 70 or even 80 kilometer range to safely snipe them from distance, since besides those battlecruisers, besides having a very powerful DPS, they also have a very scary range, which is very impressive. Well, that was a very interesting mission, and now on to the next one. Now each of the factions does have their own missions, and these missions are very important if you want to do the storyline missions, since these missions are usually the key mission to unlock a storyline mission. And as you already know, the storyline missions are the ones that will give a lot of ISK, and they are the ones that will give you a lot of faction modules, and of course lots of bounty from these rats. And these missions are also not a joke. These missions are very difficult, they're very hard, and it is recommended to have either a full fleet for these missions or to have a very powerful long-range ship. Now, in the future, I will attempt to clear these missions with a close-range ship, although I have to say I am kind of scared to do that because these rats are scary in those storyline missions, since they do a lot of damage, and approaching them is just not it is just not recommended, but I will try it in the future, of course, since why not. Now, I haven't seen a Claymore or a Cyclone in a while, I'll admit, and I had to take a closer look at that ship, and these missions are potentially going to be easier. Now, speaking of missions which are easier, these rare missions that do give lower ISK tend to be easier than the missions that give higher ISK. That's something that I did notice. For example, I did encounter the elite battlecruisers in a 5 million ISK rare mission, and I did have to be very careful about that mission since those battlecruisers have range. This mission, for example, is only 2.5 million ISK, but it is rather easier since there is only 3 ships per wave. Now, the previous mission was 4 million ISK and there were at least 6 or 7 ships per wave. Plus, of course, in the end, there was a elite frigate. Now, it is guaranteed that you will encounter a elite ship of any sorts in these missions, because these ships do have these missions do have these ships because of their rarity, and of course, since they are a little bit more difficult than the, well, actually not a little bit difficult, they're actually a lot more difficult than the normal missions, mostly because of the amount of ships that you will have to fight, and of course some of these ships are going to be very dangerous. Now, I was playing most of the factions rare missions, and I have to say Minmatar missions appear to be easier, and the Galante missions also appear to be easier, while Caldari missions can be easy, but if you encounter the elite battlecruisers or the elite cruisers, then things might be a little bit different. And so far, in my experience of doing these missions, I was mostly doing Caldari, and I was mostly doing these Minmatar missions because those missions do give me the items and the loot that I need. And so far, I was doing them very efficiently, and I also was flying several ships, and I did test out several ships, and I do have to admit that the Caracals did a very good job, especially the Caracal Navy. That ship is a absolute monster, and I'm very curious to see how much DPS I can push out of that ship, since at the moment I have like a 350 DPS on that ship, and I am still increasing my skills, so I think I'll have around 400 to 500 DPS for the video for that ship. And I also did try out a lot of the builds for it, and that ship I'll be also using for PvP. It is time for me to jump on more advanced ships, and that ship is going to be, I think, my first multi-purpose ship that I'll be using for missions, anomalies, and PvP at the same time. Well, let's see. Now I am here preparing to warp to the station in case I get jumped by a lot of these elite frigates or cruisers. But there wasn't a danger of that, and there is a elite breacher which is going to do a lot of damage, since that is a assault frigate. I think this is a elite. Let's see. Elite, yeah, it is a breacher, only a breacher. It is not the assault type of that ship. If it were that type of the ship, I would be in trouble. But, well, I am in trouble. This thing does have a webbifer, and this thing does have a warp disruptor. But, thankfully, I did manage to separate myself and the ship from the main group of enemies, and I am aligning myself at one direction while trying to hit that. Well, there we go, he is out. Okay, now I'm safe. Not gonna lie, for a moment I was scared. For a moment I was actually scared, since whenever I hear the sound of a disruptor, I don't know, I just have a bad feeling whenever I see a warp disruptor. Well, that was kind of stressful, not gonna lie, since I did not expect a frigate to do that much damage to my ship, but they did. And there is a hurricane there, and that ship is going to be one of my primary targets now, because that ship does have very good tracking, and that battlecruiser is going to be a problem, which of course I'll have to take care of. But first I have to disable this Talvar. There we go, the Talvar has been destroyed, since the Talvar did use a webbifer, which did slow me down quite a bit. And my shield is crying for help, but I will stay, since I think I can tank these two ships. Now it is a hurricane and okay, the other ship is a logistic ship, so that one will not do too much damage to me. And my shield is already recovering, so I am safe. Well, as you can see, these missions can go bad very quickly, and you really have to be careful at making sure that you separate the elite ships first, and you have to make sure that if your ship cannot take too much damage, to make sure that those ships with the disruptors are destroyed first, since if they use a disruptor on your ship, then you can't warp out, and if you can't warp out and your ship is taking a lot of damage, then you risk at losing your ship. So be very careful at doing these missions. And as you could see here, my shield was low a lot of times, and my armor was even damaged, since I did not want to warp out. I just decided to stay and fight to see what would happen, and of course it wasn't a wise decision for me to do that, but I did it, and it did pay off. Now of course I had to pay the fee to repair the armor, but of course I did clear the mission a couple seconds faster than if I did warp out. And of course the last ship on the field, it is this logistic not frigate, it is a logistic cruiser, and they aren't doing too much damage to my ship, and my shield is fully recovered, and that enemy ship is slowly going down. And well, these were just a example of two of these missions. Of course there are going to be more of these, since I do want to cover most of the missions that you can find, and most of these combat missions that are a little bit more, that are a lot more difficult. Not a little bit difficult, but a lot more difficult. And I hope that this could help. and I do hope that these missions are still going to be this difficult, since I do enjoy them a lot. Well, with that being said, I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that this was helpful. And with that being said, fly safe, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.